Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome to the Saturday monthly live stream with the open topic. Now, don't forget to ask your questions. Go to the Slido and start asking questions now. If you see a question that's close enough to yours, it is strategically best to vote it up and not split your vote with that question and then end up having neither yours nor the slightly different version get answered. Strategic voting. So go onto the Slido, check out the questions. I'll be back in just 3 or 4 minutes, and I will be sharing a brief message from my Patreon supporters, the community builders who make it possible for me to do this work for free. And that's going to be my only ad placement for this event. As you know, this channel is ad-free, except for the thank you from my patrons, which I'm going to put just at the top of the hour. All right, check out the Slido code, ask your questions. See you in a bit.
I am a patron of Andreas because I came across his videos online, and that's how I learned about Bitcoin. So that's how I got introduced to Bitcoin.
I'm out tonight at a social event organised by Andreas as part of his
Hey everyone, welcome back. Well, Windows decided to crash on me just as I was about to start streaming. I'm not even sure if my audio and video is working now. Sorry about that. We may have some additional glitches because restarting my entire broadcasting system, yeah, certain things may not quite work out exactly as planned. Apologies for that. Why don't we just dive right in, and I will bore you with further advertising and promotional messages later. Okay, I think things are working. Let's see what happens when I try to switch to a question. Oh, yeah, see the, oh, there it is. There it is. It came up. Oh, fantastic. Let's dive right in then, people. Isn't this fun? Saturday's monthly live stream Q&A, and our first question comes from Anonymous. OG Bitcoiners say a pure proof-of-stake system cannot work. Why do they claim that, and is it true? Well, this is a controversial question to get started with. Let me use my crystal ball to ponder the motivations and internal thought process of OG Bitcoiners. It's hard to say, really, but I think the real hint here comes in the part of your sentence that says, cannot work. And of course, that really depends on what you mean by cannot work. So, and also, what is a pure proof-of-stake system? And also, what's an OG Bitcoiner? You know, there's a lot of assumptions that have gone into this question, and I want to break them down because a lot of assumptions go into this kind of question in general. So let's speculate a bit. OG Bitcoiners, people who have been in Bitcoin for a long time, maybe since the beginning. That could be one definition of that. And these OG Bitcoiners say that a pure proof-of-stake system. Now, what's a pure proof-of-stake system? I'm assuming that means a proof-of-stake system that doesn't have some kind of hybrid proof-of-work. So it's just proof-of-stake. And cannot work. Cannot work for what? Cannot work for Bitcoin? Maybe. I think that's a valid possibility. So, a pure proof-of-stake system needs to be bootstrapped somehow, and one of the things about proof-of-stake, of course, is that you need to know who is going to be putting in the stake. And that creates a bit of a circular dependency, meaning that you can't bootstrap a proof-of-stake system without some kind of pre-mine. And as soon as you do a pre-mine, that's a shitcoin. So only shitcoins have proof-of-stake. That's the general argumentation. It's a circular argument, of course, because if you assume a pre-mine automatically makes something invalid, then anything that has proof-of-stake, since proof-of-stake requires a pre-mine, will by definition be invalid. I think that's stretching it a bit. Proof-of-work in the form of Bitcoin had the advantage of a virgin birth, as it's really come to be known. The idea of this immaculate conception of proof of work in Bitcoin, whereby it was a completely fair process where anyone could participate, as long, of course, as you were a true believer cypherpunk who was into the esoteric types of things that were happening in Bitcoin in 2009, and then you could do that. And even if you did, you know, that was a very, very small group. So the main problem, however, is with the idea of cannot work, because cannot work is not some kind of objective measure. It's a subjective measure, and it depends on what you're trying to do. To say that proof of stake cannot work means that you have a specific definition of what it means to work in your mind, and that definition probably colors these assumptions. It's a bit like a fish telling a bird, you're not a real fish because you can't swim. Or vice versa, a bird telling a fish, you're not a real bird because you can't fly. Well, yes, quite clearly, these are two very different things. Proof of stake does work for certain sort of assumptions and desirable goals. A consensus algorithm has a number of different goals, and depending on how much you value each one of these goals, you can say this works or doesn't work for my particular set of expectations. There is no absolute measure of whether it works or not, because not everybody has the same exact expectations. So what is the least common denominator? The least common denominator is that a consensus algorithm can solve the Byzantine fault-tolerant problem without centralizing the system. Well, the argument here is that hundreds of different consensus algorithms can solve the Byzantine fault-tolerant system with varying degrees of decentralization, depending on which group you think should have the power and how much power they should have, and which aspects of decentralization matter the most to you. But a pure proof-of-stake system can indeed solve the double spending problem at the core of the Byzantine fault-tolerant distributed system fairly effectively. It can provide finality, it can resolve double spend, and it can converge on a common consensus. And in fact, several systems do. You may argue they don't do it as well as Bitcoin because you define as well as Bitcoin based on certain assumption of what doing it well means. Other people disagree with those assumptions, of course. And here's the bottom line. Perfectly rational people can disagree as to what is most important to them, and therefore, based on the same circumstances, arrive at different conclusions about whether something works or doesn't work. You know, there is a degree of subjectivity here. We're talking about systems that have very, very large social components. They're not just pure mathematical systems. They involve pure mathematical systems that are mediating interactions between social beings, thinking social beings, but also emotional social beings, and therefore, by definition, have a degree of subjectivity. So, OG Bitcoiners say pure proof-of-stake system cannot work. Why do they claim that? Because they're making a lot of assumptions about what can and cannot work. And is it true? No. I don't think it is. I don't think it is true because I make different assumptions about what cannot work means. MicroStrategy bought $425 million worth of Bitcoin from their cash reserves. How significant is this news? I don't know. For MicroStrategy, I guess it's good news, unless, of course, the price of Bitcoin tanks, in which case it's bad news. And for Bitcoin, it's good news because if the bankers like us, we're succeeding, right? We're winning. If we get the approval of Daddy, we're winning. Oh, how wonderful, how incredibly wonderful it is to be running this anti-establishment, leaderless movement that only succeeds if it gets the approval of the leaders of the establishment. Are you fucking kidding me here? So they bought $400 million worth of Bitcoin. Who cares? What do they do with that? What are they going to contribute to consensus? How much of that are they going to put against development of decentralized technologies? How does this advance the technology? How does it advance the goals of decentralization? How does it avoid concentrating power in the hands of all those who already have too much power to start with? Please. Next question. Anonymous asks, is it true that Bitcoin will not get confidential transactions? Well, I mean, technically speaking, Bitcoin in the sidechains, such as Elements, does have confidential transactions and has for several years. If you mean by confidential transactions, kind of the formulation based on bulletproofs by Greg Maxwell. Sorry, just a quick message from my producer. Let's go back to this. Is it true that Bitcoin will not get confidential transactions? Well, it depends if you mean the confidential transactions formulated by Greg Maxwell, which have been running in the Elements sidechain for several years, blah, 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 blah. In the broader sense, will Bitcoin get robust privacy based on zero-knowledge proofs that is really impenetrable in terms of being able to encrypt the actual values in the transaction, the amounts of the inputs and outputs? I don't know, because primarily this is a political question. It's a political question because a formulation of Bitcoin that includes this type of zero-knowledge proof will instantly make it far more toxic, a bit of a poison pill, really, to mainstream regulated exchanges and other financial organizations, like MicroStrategy we were just talking about, that have decided to put money into this infrastructure and invest in it as if it's an asset. And as a result, will be allergic to systems that make it very difficult to almost impossible for them to conform with their regulatory requirements, specifically KYC and AML, Know Your Customer, and anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, and the broader surveillance Orwellian financial system that they fit in so beautifully with. So it is a very difficult political question. And of course, the question hinges on two parts. One, does the blockchain we currently call Bitcoin get confidential transactions? And the second part of that question, the hidden one, is, of course, does the blockchain that gets confidential transactions still get to be called Bitcoin, especially by those who want to put money into it? They may decide to call that Bitcoin with a suit, and the one that gets confidential transaction is called something dirty, Bitcoin Dark, or Bitcoin Anarchy, or I don't know, Bitcoin Antifa, whatever. They're gonna try and smear it somehow. So in the end, Bitcoin may get confidential transactions and get renamed by everyone into Bitcoin terrorist. 1 second. Let me make sure I'm doing this right, because I was selecting the questions the wrong way. Here we go. Anonymous asks, how do I check if any coins I hold are tied to my identity, KYC aside? What are the best ways to get back privacy? This is a great question. What Anonymous really means here is, what is the degree of taint that my coins... Stop giggling. You're not 12 years old. That's not what I mean with the word taint. Get your mind out of the gutter. What Anonymous is asking is, how do I check if some of my coins have been associated or correlated with some of my other coins, therefore violating my privacy? And what are the best ways to get back that privacy? So one of the problems with Bitcoin is that while addresses are pseudonymous, meaning that the address itself does not contain identifying information, if an identity is attached to one of your addresses and then you have poor practices in terms of address reuse or coin selection in your wallets, then what will happen is additional addresses or additional coins will get associated with the one that has an identity tag to it, and these associations are fairly easy to follow, meaning that analytics companies, or should I call them surveillance companies, are going to use that information to associate the further addresses. Samurai Wallet is one of the wallets that specializes in privacy, and one of the things that I believe belongs to them, I may be wrong, so apologies if it doesn't, is a blockchain explorer called OXT. OXT. And you can find that at the URL oxt.me. At oxt.me, you'll see a blockchain explorer. It looks kind of the same as any other blockchain explorer, but its focus is on analysis of the blockchain for some meta characteristics. These meta characteristics include the time frame of the transactions that occur, which is another very powerful privacy-reducing fingerprint that you leave behind, and the correlation of different addresses and degree of reuse of addresses. So on the oxt.me blockchain explorer, you're going to see two things. Addresses, which is exactly what you think it is, Bitcoin addresses that start with 1 or 3, or even BC1, that identify specific public keys, or in the case of oxt.me, it's a bit broader. It includes, in general, any script. Or entities. And entities are something else. Entities are groupings or clusters of addresses that have become correlated by appearing together as inputs in transactions that are not expected to be coin joins. Bottom line, what this means is if you take a couple of addresses and you use them in a sloppy way that causes them to taint each other, then you end up with having those clustered under a single entity. Now, the entities, if they have been identified to a specific person, that will be listed there, but usually they're just an anonymous ID, but that anonymous ID clusters together lots of different addresses that are believed to belong to the same controlling entity. So to answer your question, Anonymous, what you can do quite easily here is go on oxt.me and put in some of your addresses and look at the entity that is assumed to own them and see how many other addresses are indicated to be related to that. Basically see how much you've already revealed on the blockchain. That might be a good way to answer that question. All right. Let's go back to the video. Well, that was a rocky start to this live stream. We had some technical problems. Right as I started streaming and I tried to put in my little thank you video, my laptop crashed. Just straight up, just stopped working, froze. The screen froze mid-frame. One of my patrons was going thank you, and it appeared like, and they just froze mid-frame. But then, of course, it stopped streaming, so you probably just saw one of those little rotating things, you know. The hourglass, and I was sitting here going, now what? Do I just hit the power button? So anyway, I rebooted it and fortunately didn't lose too much momentum, and here we are. I lost that golden moment, that first minute, when you're eager to enter the live stream, you're excited about the upcoming Q&A. You're still not entirely jaded. You're feeling warm, fuzzy feelings towards the work I'm doing. And that's when I bombard you with advertising about why my patrons support me. And I lost that golden moment. So we're back to the questions in just a second. All right, the follow-up question in the chat. Sorry, my producer's scribbling notes frantically on a whiteboard behind. What is the website I mentioned? oxt.me. That's the full domain. oxt.me. Oxt me, man. Or something like that. Oxt me. So, yeah, that's a website for privacy. Let's see, we've got a whole bunch of questions. Now, don't forget that you can ask questions by going to the Slido and come up with some great questions, but also if you see one that's close to what you want, just vote for that one. It's gonna make everybody's life much, much easier. Anonymous asks, why are some companies offering such high interest rates for lending stablecoins? Who borrows them? Well, I'm not sure what you mean by high interest rates, Anonymous. In our current interest rate environment, 1% is a high interest rate. You see, the thing is, us little people pay interest rates. Banks, 0% on borrowing, and then they get 30% by giving it to us plebs in the form of credit cards. You know, this is known as a Ponzi scheme. All right, so why are companies offering such high interest rates for lending stablecoins? Really, I think the answer is because compared to APRs on credit cards for people who are either delinquent on their loans, have fallen onto hard times, or have terrible credit scores, even the very high interest rates you see on stablecoins, and I've seen interest rates up to 20%, but I've also seen interest rates as low as 6 to 8% on some borrowing. That's much better than what you can get from a personal loan from some commercial company, especially if you have no credit score or very low credit score or some other circumstances that make you not particularly prime borrowing capacity. You're not a prime lender. So that's who I think borrows these stablecoins. People who really don't have better options. And I assume that is the case. Another possibility, of course, is if you're talking about collateralized stablecoins where people are putting in their crypto and then taking a stablecoin out and paying an interest rate on that borrowing. Well, in that case, it's people who are really speculating that they can have their cake and eat it too. They can keep their crypto, their various cryptocurrencies, in that lending collateralized contract, and they can earn a bit of capital that they can use for various other purposes, perhaps invest in margin plays, and always make more than 6, 8, 10% that is required to pay back that loan. There's a term for that kind of financial speculator. I believe it's a scientific term. Gambler, yes, that's called a gambler. $232 people online now, which is the perfect time to introduce our friend Sujay. Sujay asks, what are your thoughts on the blockchain trilemma, and does Lightning Network challenge this trilemma? The blockchain trilemma is the characterization that a blockchain can either be decentralized or, decentralized, secure, and fast. I think that's the best formulation of it, or the easiest formulation of it. And usually fast might be cheap as well. So it's the same kind of concept. So of those three, you can always pick two. So you can either make it secure and fast, in which case it's not decentralized, or secure and decentralized, in which case it's slow, or decentralized and fast, in which case it's not secure. So I think that's the general characterization of the trilemma. And does Lightning Network challenge this trilemma? Yes, it does. But it challenges it by dipping one foot in layer 1, keeping the other foot in layer 2, and introduces some other problems which are much less certainty of your ability to achieve closure on the network at the time you want and at the fees you want. So I think this is a bit like, it's a bit like conservation of energy, right? Conservation of energy is something that, as a law, applies, but it applies within a system. And this is often confusing to people because otherwise you forget the externalities of the system. If you make your conception of the system very narrow, you might think you violated conservation of energy. It appears that energy is either being created from nothing or destroyed, but it's not. It's just entering or exiting that system as you formulated it, right? Like, for example, conservation of energy is impossible because, is violated by climate change, for example. In order for that theory to be true, it would violate conservation of energy, which, of course, you can say as long as you assume that there's no gigantic fusion ball in the sky producing energy at very high rates in the form of sunshine. At that point, if you incorporate that into your system, then, of course, you do have conservation of energy. So it really depends on how you define the context. The context defines the rule. The trilemma exists within a specific context. If you take only layer 1, then a trilemma exists. If you take layer 1 and layer 2, then you seemingly have solved the trilemma, but what you're doing is you're creating externalities that swap from one layer to the other. So you're using layer 1 to get some of the security guarantees, and you're using layer 2 to get some of the speed and low-cost transaction guarantees. But at the interface of the two layers, there are some trade-offs that occur. And these trade-offs involve certain aspects of how commitment transactions are recorded on the blockchain. If you have a channel that closes, and what are the guarantees of that, etc., etc. So you don't just get a win-win-win situation. You just switch one set of trade-offs for a different set of trade-offs, which, in the case of the Lightning Network, of course, means that you're switching certain guarantees that are really, really important for very large transactions, where whether it's fast and cheap as a transaction doesn't really matter. And you're doing so to get fast and cheap, but, and this is critically important, not with the same security guarantees that you would have with the very large transactions, which makes Lightning Network much more suitable for very small transactions. I wouldn't put enormous amounts of money in a hot wallet on a system that requires the nodes to be online 24/7 to monitor for protocol violations. Otherwise, you lose or risk losing funds in your channel. So that's a trade-off, right? I haven't solved the trilemma. I've bought myself fast and cheap, but only in the context of doing it on much smaller transactions, because I have lost some of the security characteristics that exist on layer 1. But those security characteristics don't matter as much when you're doing smaller transactions, and fast and cheap does matter much more when you're doing smaller transactions, so therefore you do get your cake and eat it too, as long as you move between those layers gracefully and appropriately. I think I've beaten that metaphor to death. All right. So I'm going to take a sip of my coffee out of my fantastic Bitcoin pizza mug. My very first purchase with Bitcoin, and I believe I spent 5 Bitcoin for this, was a pound of coffee beans sent to me from someone, I believe, in Colorado. It was not very good coffee, and in retrospect, it was rather expensive per pound of coffee. That is not the coffee I'm drinking now, although arguably its quality would not have deteriorated that much 7 years later, because it was pretty bad to start with. But it's still lovely coffee. So, I'm sorry. Am I making you hungry with my pizza pick? All right. I'm going to have some coffee. I'm going to put up the moderation rules and come back to you in just a second. On a scale of 1 to 2 to the 256, how much fun are you having? George Orwell asks, "Hi Andreas, when I was alive, I wrote a book called 1984. It seems some of you lifees are using it as an instruction manual. Can Bitcoin save you? Thanks." Oh, George. I know. I mean, it was supposed to be a cautionary tale, not an instruction manual. You know, there's another author of your era who is actually also one of my favorite authors, which I really think, if you don't, if you allow me to say, I'm gonna let you finish, but have you heard of Aldous Huxley? There's 2 seminal books that I think anybody interested in the current political climate should read to really, really understand some of the things that are happening in the world. George Orwell's 1984 and, of course, his, I believe, previous book, Animal Farm, are critical reading. They're also funny, sad, tragic, gripping, great tales. But 1984 tells only part of the story. 1984 is about a technologically dystopian society that is centralized under a boot-on-your-neck, statist, really, really fascist control system. And it came from George Orwell's understanding of the politics of fascism as they were emerging in the early 1930s. All across Europe and and also in the United States, where fascism was very popular and still is. But George Orwell really imagined this as an all-powerful state that subjugates its citizens primarily through brutal oppression in a very overt manner. Aldous Huxley wrote another book called Brave New World, and I really do recommend you read that. Aldous Huxley had a different perspective, which is actually even more powerful. Again, a dystopia of a society under heavy control, but in this case it wasn't the overt control of violence and fear, but instead control through cheap entertainment. By tickling the dopamine centers of pliable subjects through empty entertainment that kept the people occupied with triviality so that they would miss the horrific things happening in their society. Facebook. And between Orwell and Huxley, we see what has emerged today is really kind of the perfect mix of the two, because not only do you get Aldous Huxley's entertainment-based enslavement through social media, but beautifully enough, there is a compact between the social media companies that feed this data into various private corporations and, of course, law enforcement, intelligence agencies, government regulators, and others to bring to fruition at the same time George Orwell's 1984. Now, you're asking, can Bitcoin save you? Yes, but very, very indirectly. It saves us primarily by doing two things. One, it breaks the monopoly control over money, which hopefully, over the long run, leads to a weakened state that cannot fund oppressive operations without the consent of the governed. So if a state does not have the consent of the governed, but has control over the monetary system, they can fund all of their oppressive operations without any consent simply through hidden forms of taxation such as inflation. And that's enough, because then votes don't matter, elections don't matter, tax rates don't matter. You're paying a very low tax rate. It's just that your dollar is worth less and less and less every year. And through the Cantillon effect, trillions and trillions and trillions are being funneled into the open maws of plutarchs that are controlling you. So that's one aspect of how Bitcoin saves us. The other aspect, which I think is equally important, is not just the money function. It's the broader function of creating trust networks that are decentralized in nature. These trust networks can be used in other areas, primarily in areas of governance, but also self-governance of various communities. These participatory trust systems can be used to re-decentralize the internet, to produce technologies and visions like the Web3 vision that comes from Ethereum, which is the third iteration of the web, the decentralized web, and things like that. Now, whether you agree that Ethereum is the right way to do this or not, the vision of re-decentralizing the web, of re-decentralizing applications and storage and programmable smart contracts and money in such a way as to be able to build entire complex modular systems that are decentralized, that have decentralized governance models, decentralized autonomous organizations, and things like that. To me, that's a compelling vision. And that compelling vision is one of the reasons I'm so interested in that aspect of Ethereum's technology. So can Bitcoin save us? Yes, because it opened the door for both of these things to emerge. It created the foundation on which all of these other things are built. So when it comes to save us, it may not be called Bitcoin, and it may be a secondary effect that's way removed. Kind of like how everybody runs Linux. They just kind of call it Android, or they call it the subsystem of their Windows, or they call it the underlying POSIX infrastructure of their Mac operating system, and it's still kind of Linux in every device everywhere. You just never know it's there. Linux won by disappearing into the background. Maybe Bitcoin saves us, not because we use and know we are using Bitcoin, but because it kind of fades into the background as an infrastructure technology that has changed our very conception of how trust works in a network society. All right, this one's going to be fun. I have seen tweets saying a feature which speeds up signature validation can now be enabled because the patent has expired. Why does Bitcoin need to wait for patent law? This is really, really interesting. So I'm going to try and explain what Mike said. Now, I was warned by my producer that when I say some of the words I'm going to say in the answer to this question, I'm going to lose 50 to 100 viewers who are going to be terrified by the extreme and acute onset of mathematics, suddenly feel stupid because they don't understand any of the words I'm saying, and they'll jump ship. Okay, don't be afraid. I also don't understand many of the words I am saying. Even after hours and hours of research on this stuff, I have like a very, very thin understanding. I'm not a cryptographer. I'm not a mathematician, and my understanding of mathematics is really much shallower than I would like. So, having said that, don't be scared. I'm going to say lots of words. I'm going to get some of them wrong, so please tell me in the comments afterwards. And that's not important because there's a really fun story here. All right, so what's Mike talking about? Just a few days ago, I think last week, a patent expired. This patent was taken out in September of 1999. And this patent involved a technique called GLV, which is the acronym that has to do with the names of the inventors who wrote a paper that had their names in it. And I don't even remember it, whatever. Anyway, so these three mathematicians invented a technique, and this technique is basically a shortcut for doing some parts of the arithmetic involved in calculating elliptic curve digital signatures, so that when verifying elliptic curve digital signatures, you can use this shortcut to speed up the calculation by 25%. Blah. Bottom line, as of the next version of Bitcoin Core, this will be enabled, and initial block download especially, which is when you start from the beginning, but also synchronization thereafter. For Bitcoin nodes that are validating the transactions, they have to validate the signatures, and in order to do that, they have to do elliptic curve math, and that math will be sped up by 25%. So that's not the fun story. That's the actual what happened. This was not available for use in Bitcoin Core because it was under patent. Now, to Mike's question, why does BTC need to wait for patent law? Because commercial entities use BTC, and if there was patent infringing code inside the BTC Core client that was in use, that would cause problems, and that would prevent commercial organizations from using it, or it would expose them to liability of being sued. So who wants that? So it's laid dormant. In fact, there's been an implementation of GLV, of the GLV endomorphism as it's known, inside the libsecp256k1 library. Now that is a library that does all of the elliptic curve mathematics in Bitcoin Core, and here's where the story gets interesting. Back in the day, in the days of Satoshi, Satoshi made a very specific choice. Satoshi chose a specific curve to use for Bitcoin, and that curve is known as SecP256k1. It comes from a set of standards by the National Institutes of Science and Technology, or Standards and Technology, NIST. I can never remember if it's science or standards. It doesn't really matter. NIST. And they published this set of standards for cryptography, which include, among other things, SecP256k1, which was the curve that Satoshi used. And here's the interesting thing. When Satoshi chose this curve, nobody else was using this curve. And that's weird. And in fact, it generated a ton of controversy, especially in the beginning. People were like, well, why this one? Especially when there's a better one that everybody uses, which is SecP256R1. And what is the difference? So the R1 curve is based on random parameter set, whereas the K1 curve is based on a very specific set of parameters, which, according to Koblitz, characterize a set of curves in the elliptic curve domain that have certain characteristics, and these characteristics are called endomorphisms. These are basically shortcuts inside the curve that allow you to do certain types of arithmetic operations faster. They're optimizations that you can do because it's a Koblitz type curve. But Koblitz curves, double-edged sword. Because the endomorphisms make certain operations more efficient, there's a possibility they also weaken the curve, that there are some shortcuts that can make basically breaking the curve more efficient. Not entirely, but by a few bits of security. So people were suspicious of Koblitz curves and didn't want to use them. And only Satoshi did. This created an argument. No, we shouldn't be using this curve. We should change it, and let's change it to the R1, which is the one everybody's using, the one the NSA also proposed in their book, but which everyone has standardized on. Fast forward 4 or 5 years, and our national hero, Edward Snowden, came out and revealed the fact, among other things, that everything that all of these paranoid people were screaming about was, in fact, absolutely true, and to be a paranoid makes you a boring realist nowadays. Among other things, Edward Snowden revealed that within that same document by NIST, the NSA had snuck in a random number generator called dual ECRGB that was supposedly based on random parameters, but in fact wasn't. It contained a backdoor. That backdoor had allowed the NSA to unravel all SSL encrypted websites and be able to monitor traffic to those. And that backdoor was known. Not only known and placed in there, but in fact, even after people suspected that this random number generator was backdoored, certain companies like RSA Security refused to remove it. We now believe that's because they got a $10 million bribe by the NSA to subvert the security of everyone on the planet. Fuck you, RSA. A bunch of mathematicians stopped collaborating with the NSA on any mathematics projects, even the, until then, neutral and kind of respected NIST standards, because they got stabbed in the back by an organization that put the entire world at risk in order to put a backdoor into the standards that everyone uses in business and academia and consumer products and in military applications. And then, of course, they got the RSA security company to stab everyone in the back for another 10 years after it was revealed. Oof. Now, guess what happened next? People noticed that 256R1, the other curve that Satoshi didn't choose, also had a rather suspicious random number parameter. A strange choice, because it wasn't random. It was based on the hash of a preimage, and that preimage, it wasn't a nothing up my sleeve number like 3.1415829, you know, whatever, the digits of pi, or 2, or any other number you could have picked to make it obvious that you weren't artificially selecting. It was a rather long hex number, which we now suspect was put there because the NSA had backdoored 256R1 also. As a result, in retrospect, now more than a decade later, we look back and think, turns out the slight reduction in key security of 256K1 because of the Koblitz endomorphisms that Satoshi chose, that strange choice. Turns out that's a lot better than a reduction in security to 0 bits because the NSA has a fucking backdoor again. And so as a result, it turns out this was a great choice. And now it's paying dividends again because due to the lack of patent on the GLV endomorphism, we can now use that to speed up the verification of signatures by 25%. What a great story, isn't it? I mean, I love this stuff. All of the intrigue and the difficult decisions, and then these great revelations coming later, and the backstabbing, and you know, the creeping incipient fascism of the US intelligence community and all of these other beautiful things that are happening in the background. And we get to find out years later that the people who were warning us about this stuff were actually correct. And turns out, in this and in a few other cases, Satoshi Nakamoto had made several very, very insightful, maybe lucky choices that are going to have a long-lasting impact and that made Bitcoin even more secure than we originally imagined. Maybe one of these choices was entirely wrong. Maybe it's going to end up having some vulnerability we didn't expect. But so far, Satoshi got lots of this absolutely right. All right. Okay, so thank you so much, Big Brother, for continuing to listen. Thank you, BB, for continuing to listen. That's not Big Brother, is it? I was thinking this had a reference to the NSA. Oh no, it's BB's listening in the shower. I see. Okay, well, don't worry, BB. You're not the only one listening in the shower. So is Big Brother. I hope you were singing. All right, let's see what else is happening here. I know, this is, you may have noticed I'm very silly today. What a shocker. That's never happened before. Okay, let's go back to a serious question now. I'm going to try. It's been 50 minutes. I'm having so much fun. We're going to extend today's live stream. We had some technical difficulties. We're going to run a bit late. It's okay. You don't have anything better to do on a Saturday, do you? Probably not. Next question comes from Simon. Simon asks, "Hi, Andreas. In relation to a previous question on Discord," this is, by the way, this is the Patreon Community Builders Discord, the super secret exclusive chat room that community builders get to participate in. And Simon asked me a question last week that I answered out of turn. The question was, how can I sign a message in order to prove I own the specific address that sent Bitcoin? And this is the question that apparently many Satoshi Nakamoto pretenders could not find the correct answer to. Because if you want to prove that you own the private keys to an address, there is a very, 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 very simple way to do so. And the very, very simple way to do so is to take a text message. Let's say that text message says something like, "I am Andreas Antonopoulos, and on the, what's the date today? 26th of September, 2020, I own this address." Now, what am I doing here? First of all, I'm stating some things in the message. I'm stating who I am. I'm stating the date, and that's important because I could have signed this message way in the past, and you wouldn't know that I still owned it today if I published this signature much, much later. Maybe I don't own it anymore. Maybe I had the signature on standby just in case someone's challenged me. So I put the date in there. That means it was signed after that date or on that date. And then I take that and I sign it. And the way you sign it is basically you apply a digital signature the same way that your wallet applies a digital signature to a transaction input. In the case your wallet and a transaction input, it takes the transaction, it calculates a hash of different parts of the transaction, the inputs, the outputs, the amounts, the time lock, etc. And then it takes that fingerprint and signs it. In the case of signing a message, what you do is you take the message, you hash it with SHA-256, you get a fingerprint, and then you apply a digital signature to that fingerprint, like you would a transaction, and that signature now proves that that message was signed. The private key you use to sign that signature corresponds to an address. And you can calculate, does that signature correspond to this public key or Bitcoin address? And if you know the Bitcoin address and you're shown the message, the signature, and the address, you can confirm that it was signed, in fact, by the person who has the corresponding private key that you don't know. But clearly, the person who did sign this did know the private key. And in fact, they did know it on or after 26 September 2020, because that's in the message. And they stated in their message that they are Andreas Antonopoulos. So, you know, I mean, there could be a cloak and dagger game of subterfuge and misdirection, but most likely That's because Andreas on top signed this message. So if you see a message signed by, I don't know, 145 different Bitcoin addresses that says, I own these addresses and they're not owned by this other person, then you can assume that those addresses were in fact controlled by the person who signed that message, and the reason they wrote that message was to make a point. Simon, you can do that. A bunch of different clients can do that. Probably the easiest to use, in my opinion, would be Electrum, and you can use it with a hardware wallet so that your keys are never on the desktop. Electrum can sign a text message with a signature from a key on the hardware wallet. Very easy. And you can put whatever you want in that message, and you can use that to prove that you still control that address or the keys that belong to the address. Now, the really interesting question is, if you are trying to prove that you are, let's say, Satoshi Nakamoto, and you have this very easy way of proving it because you have the keys and you just need to sign a message, do you do that, or do you construct some kind of elaborate dance, which is much more complicated? Occam's razor says, you just sign a fucking message. And that was entirely theoretical and hypothetical, of course. So, Anonymous says, can we reboot Bitcoin to, Can we reboot Bitcoin to another chain by replicating the UTXO set like Ethereum? Not that I want it, just asking. Yes. Maybe. Yes. Maybe. Yes. Yes, we can, but you would need some additional information. So this is how I would do it. Let's say you wanted to create a Genesis block that captured all of everybody's balance at this particular time and allowed anyone to spend from that balance by storing only one thing in the Genesis block. Yes, we can do this. We can do this thanks to an ingenious invention by Ralph Merkle, the Merkle tree. And so here's how you would do it, very, very simply. You would take all of the UTXO and you would store it in some kind of data structure that said, this is the transaction ID, this is the amount, and this is a script that can unlock it. And you would hash that, very much how transactions are hashed in a Merkle tree. And then you would hash all of the transactions that currently exist at the snapshot block, the block where you're taking a snapshot of the current state of Bitcoin. And you would produce a single Merkle root. Now, because the Merkle tree is a binary tree, you can do this very efficiently. If you want to store, 10 million UTXO, you can do so with 14 levels of the tree, something like 15 levels of the tree. And that will do it, basically. And did I do the math right? No, I did the math wrong. 16 million, 24 levels of the tree. 24 levels of the tree, sorry. So for 24 levels of the tree, you could store 16 million UTXO. Now, what that means is that anybody who wants to spend has to present a proof that their spendable coins were included in this Merkle tree, which means that any transaction that spends from that Genesis block where you've ingested all of Bitcoin would basically say, here is the script that I owned at the time, and here are 23 hashes that you use in order to prove that that script belonged to the Merkle root that is in the Genesis block. You provide a Merkle path. And by those 23, now that would be a pretty long proof, but of course you'd only submit that when you're applying a signature to spend those coins for the first time, and only when you do that. So it would make a rather big initial transaction. And of course you'd need to write a special client, and this special client would have to be able to accept these proofs in order to spend from the snapshot. So yes, that's how you do it. I'm sure there are 100 optimizations that can be done on top of this very, very obvious and dumb idea I just expressed, but I mean, if you can do it that way, and that's not too cumbersome, and is totally doable and not too suboptimal, then you can do it better, most likely. All right, let's get to some serious questions now. Lucia asks, "Hi Andreas, here are two vitally important questions. What's up with the emoji of the rat under the Bitcoin symbol?" So some people are asking here, oh right, of course, Lucia. I'm going to run this one again. That's me rewinding. Let's try this one a second time, because Lucia told me this at our VR happy hour last week, and then I just completely spaced because I'm reading from my teleprompter, and yeah, my brain didn't engage. Lucia asks, "Hi Andreas, here are two vitally important questions. What's up with the emoji of the rat under the Bitcoin symbol, and what is a RIPCORD blockchain?" All right, first of all, the emoji of a rat under the Bitcoin symbol. Ironically, this is interpreted two different ways. The original interpretation that I wanted to have for that emoji comes from a talk I did about the security of the Bitcoin system. And I did this talk back in, I think, 2015 or 2016. And it's part talk, part stand-up comedy. It's a bit of a comedy monologue, and it's called Bubble Boy and the Sewer Rat. And I know you're probably thinking that is a very weird title, and the talk is even weirder. But the basic concept here is that Bitcoin is secure, not because it is isolated from attacks like Bubble Boy, but instead because it is constantly exposed to attacks and has evolved strong immune defenses against them, like a sewer rat. So when I say Bitcoin is like a sewer rat, that's a compliment. But in order to get that, you have to watch the talk, Bubble Boy and the Sewer Rat, and understand what I mean. So Bitcoin is the sewer rat, and that's what's represented by that emoji. That's the cute little rat that is still not dead, despite all of the things that are trying to attack it, because it has such a strong immune system. And that's how decentralized systems work. Now, ironically, people flip that. People say the banking system is a rat, and Bitcoin is the rat poison. And so Bitcoin represents the poison that takes down the rats that are the banks. Yeah, kind of. And so, well, listen, I'm not going to judge it. The emoji plays both ways. You could put it on a t-shirt, and then you can go around, and people are like, oh, why do you have a rat, and what's that B symbol above it? And then you can pick one of the two stories to run with in your explanation. The rat poison one is probably easier to explain than to go into a whole monologue about this weird Greek guy called Antonopoulos who did a talk called Bubble Boy and the Sewer Rat. They're going to lose you halfway through that first sentence. So in terms of good storytelling, go with the rat poison for the banks. What is a RIPCORD blockchain? A RIPCORD blockchain was a backronym designed by my team in order to encompass some of the important characteristics that make blockchains interesting, or some blockchains interesting, whereas other blockchains, not so much. So I've been talking for a while as to the fact that people use the word blockchain to mean lots of different stuff, and some blockchains are interesting and other blockchains are not. And for a while I was trying to find a neat way of saying this, and I had used various formulations. You've probably heard me talk about the 5 pillars of an open blockchain. I used to use the same kind of formulation: open, neutral, borderless, censorship resistant, etc. And then some of these things would change over time. In order to keep it more organized, we came up with this backronym. A backronym is when you make an acronym and you make it backwards by first knowing what you want to say and then trying to find letters that fit together. You know, kind of like Patriot Act, which is fascism wrapped up in the flag. That's a classic backronym. RIPCORD means revolutionary, immutable, public, collaborative, open, resistant, and decentralized. And the idea is that the blockchains that are interesting are the ones that have revolutionary potential or conception, that are immutable, that are publicly verifiable, publicly audible, publicly participant, that are collaborative, so that the rules emerge by the collaboration of the consensus participants, that are open in terms of being neutral to participants, in terms of having open access, in terms of being able to participate without vetting or authorization, that are resistant, censorship resistant, prior restraint resistant, denial of service resistant, etc., and decentralized, which of course encompasses all of those characteristics and shows you how we get those. So that's what RIPCORD is. It was my attempt to organize all of the thoughts into a single common framework. It works. It needs a bit of explanation. It makes for a better visual, and it helps people remember the checklist. So we'll see how that goes. All right. 1404. Let's do one more question now. Then I'm going to bore you with some advertising, and then I'm going to do the final question of the day, which will be the best question of the day, of course, and that's how I'm going to get you to stay and not leave immediately as soon as I start playing my ads. Cobra asks, can you touch on how the ICO craze of yesterday and the current DeFi craze of today are different, and how are they the same? Okay, they're entirely different. Entirely different. I think it's important to emphasize that ICO is spelled ICO and DeFi is spelled DEFI. Already there's one letter in common. Entirely different. ICOs are a play on IPOs, whereas DeFi has been characterized by many as the derivatives and CDO pyramid schemes of 2008. So completely different type of financial scam. ICO is one type of financial scam. DeFi is often a completely different type of financial scam. Now, some DeFi have really, really great characteristics that also relate them to various kinds of margin lending, leveraged investment, yield farming schemes, which are another completely different category of scam. How are they the same? They're the same in one crucial characteristic, which is, in a sea of scams, there are some very important pearls of wisdom, both in the ICO and in the current DeFi craze. We are seeing a lot of garbage. We are seeing a lot of opportunists trying to extract money from gullible investors. But what are we getting in return? What we're getting in return is two things. One, we're getting an investor education in the school of hard knocks, which means that when you throw your money at things that have no track record, are completely unproven, come with enormously optimistic promises, and you exercise very little judgment, or you pay attention to what the influencer with the fancy YouTube channel said, you lose your money, as you should. And that's great investment education. You need to be really careful with these things. In among them, however, there are some real things happening. And the same thing with the ICO craze. A lot of people were very negative about the ICO craze, but here's the thing. In between the regulated, SEC-vetted, accredited investor domain where only a few already rich people who are already close to the sources of money can invest into a few carefully vetted companies that have been blessed by the 10 biggest VCs in Palo Alto, that's one extreme. The other extreme is a complete free-for-all full of scammers and scams. In between this is the possibility that in the future we have an open fundraising mechanism that allows startups from all over the world to seek investment capital from a global pool of investors. That global pool of investors, even without accreditation from anywhere in the world, being able to tap into a global pool of investments and open up the world of investment to everyone with all of the risks and dangers that includes, but also all of the possibilities that includes for alleviating poverty, for increasing opportunity, for allowing markets to function. And in that, people will need to receive a rapid education. Well, the exact same thing is happening with DeFi, meaning that between the carefully approved, again, CFTC-vetted financial instruments that are controlled by a few gatekeepers in the also incredibly corrupt world of investment banking that exists on Wall Street, and the complete free-for-all of scams we see today, somewhere in between is a happy medium where people learn how to carefully evaluate these things, and on the back of this innovation, people build really, really important, novel, innovative, global, borderless, RIPCORD types of applications that actually do offer enormous opportunity for everyone around the world. Both of these crazes happened on the back of a real technology which will have real and lasting implications on the world of finance, and which in the short term is plagued by a mountain of bullshit so high that not even the best mountaineers of Kilimanjaro and Everest can ever hope to surmount this mount, the mount of bullshit. So you have to understand that just because it all appears to be crap doesn't mean there isn't real technology, and that this real technology isn't going to have profound implications on how economics, finance, and other things work in the future. And you need to be able to look through that mountain of bullshit and see, are there any pearls? Maybe there are no pearls right now. Maybe there are some pearls. And make those decisions very, very carefully. All right, so I hope you're enjoying this. We've got a lot of people on the live stream today. Thank you so much for giving me your time on a Saturday morning. Thank you to all of the people who have been asking these fantastic questions. Thank you for humoring me in my particularly weird and silly style and my answers to your questions, which sometimes are rambling and incoherent and sometimes are on the mark. I really do appreciate your efforts. But most of all, I appreciate all of the people who make it possible for me to do this work. Now listen, I don't have sponsors, I don't endorse products, I haven't been paid off by big companies in the space in order to toe the line. My opinions do not come from an investment or a sponsor. I really do consistently try to stick with my principles, speak the truth as I see it, which you may disagree with, but it is the truth as I see it, with a neutral perspective, and all in the purpose of one singular mission, which is to provide quality education about this incredible technology to as many people as possible in as many languages as possible. When I started this journey, I was alone, and it was a lot of hard work, and I wasn't very effective. And over time, I've gotten better at this, but I've also built a team of 12 people at the moment, who I'm very happy to call my friends and colleagues, and who help me do my best work, and who take care of all of the details I'm really bad at, because they're really good at those details, and make it possible for me to do high quality production in more languages, in more formats than ever before. And all of that is funded by voluntary independent donations in crypto, by voluntary subscriptions through Patreon and YouTube memberships. And I would especially like to thank all of the people on Patreon who not only support me financially, but also help me validate ideas and test out new products and evaluate strategic direction and call me out when I'm doing something wrong and point out the problems we have, but always in a constructive way, and give me all of their support and kindness. So I'm going to thank them very specifically for the next few minutes, and then I'm going to play a video about why they help me do this work. And after all that is done, I'm going to come back and answer one or two more questions, the best ones I can find from the Slido. You can either watch what I'm going to do next, or you can go to the Slido and ask some great questions. Either way, I'll be back in a few minutes, and thank you for your patience, and thank you so much for all of your support. All right. My patrons, I'm going to thank my patrons right meow. One of my staff asked me to say that. It's incredibly silly. My patrons are the cat's meow. Last week it was the bee's knees, but this time it's the cat's meow, so thank you so much. Augustin Labaroni, Amber Scott, Antonio Lama, see, I need my glasses for this. I'm pulling it closer. Oh, wow. Antonio Luna, Bitcoin Honey Badger, Bitcoin Newbie, Brooklyn Frank, Brian Odlum, Carlos M, Crypto Plaza, Madrid, Crypto 49ers, Crypto Chrissy, meow, thank you so much. D++, David Fryer, David Hardage, David Maddock, David Orban, David Stansel, DGA, Grows on Merkle Trees, EAWF, Ed Posnak, Eduardo Cavero, Elda, Elias E, Emin Sh, Enrico, Fingless Cave, Frank M, I Make Lemonade, Jimbo Angelito Alba, John Pathfinder Lester, Keish, Karen and Joy Shihara, Cosmatos, Lucia, Mark Howarth, Matt Briz, Mike Riddle, Mr. Ponce, Niraj Badaya, Pablo Cepetas, Peter Potboiler, Rafael Cislak, Requiem, Richard Taylor, Santiago Gonzalez Toral, T. Bodyman, Tigerix, Vincenzo, Sedivad, and Yes to Crypto. Thank you, thank you, thank you, meow, and thank you to all of you who make it possible for me to do this work. Now, for those of you watching, you may have noticed a lot of these people are asking some great questions week after week and putting in a lot of work to make this show really, really good. But rather than me trying to tell you why these people support my work, why don't they tell you why they support my work while I go look at some great questions?
I am a patron of Andreas because I came across his videos online, and that's how I learned about Bitcoin. So that's how I got introduced to Bitcoin.
I'm out tonight at a social event organised by Andreas as part of his Patreon support. We just had a few drinks in a pub, which is a Punch Tavern, downtown London. So it's been a really fun evening to meet a lot of like-minded people.
We should support the work Andreas is doing. He's doing so much in getting new people into Bitcoin and into Bitcoin education.
He's a great teacher. He can explain very complex topics in an easy to understand way. He's very honest, very precise, technically prepared, and intellectually honest. I think is his best characteristic.
Brings such clarity to really complex subjects, which is Bitcoin, and the industry around it.
It has been a very, very good inspiration for me. And every Bitcoin I'm giving to him, it will be very well used in helping others understand Bitcoin, and I think it will improve the world at some point.
Being a patron, I get to meet Andreas, and that's why I love being a patron. I'm going to continue being a patron.
I think it's just a good thing. If you're interested in learning new things and also want to support the Bitcoin community, then you got to be a patron.
Being a Patreon makes you feel special. You can attend to his live Q&A sessions. You can meet him at happy hours. It's really great, totally worth it. I'm very, very enthusiastic of being a Patreon.
I'd like him to be able to produce his great and valuable content in the future, free from advertising, and just with the help of his patrons, and that's why I'm supporting him on Patreon.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and share.
All right, I have been notified by my producer that I have fully exceeded my budget for silliness in this episode, and I'm going to have to borrow some from future episodes in order to maintain a degree of silliness that is not overwhelming. To that, I say no. I've got 2 more questions I'm going to answer. Thank you for your patience and for watching that brief video. I do want to make a comment. Someone recently told me, why do you have a video of all of these randos saying why they appreciate your work? Why don't you get some reputable people in the space, some well-known people, you know, some influencers to do that? You know what? I understand where you're coming from. Yes, it would be better marketing for me to have a bunch of well-known people in the space basically kiss my ass on video and make you think that you should support my work. But here's the thing. Some of these people may have actually used my work or seen my work or learned from my work. That's possible, but you're not trusting them because you think they are representative of my audience. You would trust them because they have reputation, they're authorities in the space. And I don't believe in that. I really don't. So the reason I have just the regular people who have supported me for years, who come all the way out to a happy hour in Germany, driving 10 hours with their family, thank you, Enrico, just to come and see me and say hello and like be genuine and share a beer with me and have a conversation, and who recognize that I'm just a regular person too, and so are they, and we have fun. We share this incredible enthusiasm for this technology. We share our love for Bitcoin. We share our love for what this can do for the world, and have that genuine conversation. And then take people who are honestly rather shy and have never been in front of a camera and really don't know what to say, and say, can you just say a word? Just why are you doing this? And have them speak from the heart, completely unscripted, embarrassed as they are to appear on camera and do that. Yeah, that's what I want to do. Not some reputable influencer. I want to put on screen the people who actually understand why we're doing this and have for years and support my work. So, before I start crying, let's go to a question. All right, Anonymous asks, what is the best way to track Bitcoin transactions for tax purposes? How do I find a tax professional who knows how to account for Bitcoin transactions? Anonymous, I'm going to answer this from a very specific perspective, but a lot of this does apply to many different jurisdictions. I'm going to answer it from the perspective of the US, because the United States of America, because I pay taxes in the USA, and I kind of understand the tax framework around Bitcoin in the USA. So, but a lot of this applies in exactly the same way in many jurisdictions. The percentages may be different, the thresholds may be different, there may be some exceptions, there may be some allowances, but the basic framework applies. There are 2 aspects of tax that you need to deal with when dealing with Bitcoin. The first one is really straightforward, and it's income tax. Whether you get paid in apples, goats, euro, US dollars, or Bitcoin, if you receive something of value in return for something you did, that's considered income. It doesn't matter what form it takes. And you have to pay tax on that, even if what you got paid in is apples, at least in most jurisdictions. And while in many cases people won't know that you got paid, that's not how the tax system works. And if you hide it, you could get into a lot of trouble. And also you're kind of breaking the social compact with the rest of society. So the bottom line is, if you get paid in Bitcoin for something you did, you have to pay income tax on that payment. So if you're earning Bitcoin, and if you're not, I recommend you start. If you're earning crypto in general, and again, if you're not, I recommend you start. It's the best way to be in this community. You have to pay income tax on that, just as if you got paid in something else. The easiest way to do that is to price yourself in your national currency, write an invoice for $100 US, get paid the equivalent in Bitcoin, and account for that as $100 US worth of income at the time of payment. And that gives you a good basis to calculate your income tax. So fair market value which you calculate basically by taking some kind of price feed that is either reputable or broadly used. There's a number of these you can use, from websites that have been around for a very long time, from exchanges that have a lot of liquidity, or from centralized institutions like the Chicago Mercantile Exchange Bitcoin reference rate, which I'm on the oversight board. I'm not recommending or endorsing that, but I'll tell you I know how it works. So these are all broadly accepted ways to calculate how much was Bitcoin worth on this day in this currency. And you can make that calculation. So for income tax purposes. Then the second one that is trickier is capital gains. So if you have a taxable event, you buy Bitcoin, you sell Bitcoin, you convert one crypto for another crypto, you buy a cup of coffee with a cryptocurrency, you pay someone for a service for the cryptocurrency, someone pays you for a cryptocurrency. All of those things are taxable events. At every time when you acquire or dispose of cryptocurrency in one of these taxable events, and by the way, notice that moving from my wallet to my wallet isn't a taxable event. That's just moving things around internally. I'm not changing the value. I'm not converting it into anything. If I just move Bitcoin from one of my wallets to another one of my wallets, that's not a taxable event. But if I convert it to Ether, that is a taxable event. Every time you have a taxable event, you have to calculate the change in value of that particular cryptocurrency from when you acquired it. So if I buy Bitcoin and then sell it, I have to calculate the change in value. If there's an increase in value, I have to pay what is called capital gains. If there is a reduction in value, I can claim capital losses. And at the end of the year, I add up all of my capital gains and all of my capital losses. And if I have capital gains, I have to pay tax on that. Depending on how long I held the underlying cryptocurrency, I might pay long-term or short-term capital gains. Short-term capital gains generally is the same as income. You've got to be careful with that. It can get very expensive. Long-term capital gains in the US, last I checked, was 15% regardless of your level of income. So if you hold for more than a year, you get a lower rate. Now, I'm not an accountant. I'm just telling you what I know from my own experience, and this may be already incorrect. Now that's tricky to do because you have to decide which specific chunk of Bitcoin did I just spend, how do I calculate it? There's various ways. You can do a system called first in, first out, where you consider the first Bitcoin you earned to be the first Bitcoin you sold, and therefore you match those two prices for capital gains. You can do the opposite, first in, last out, or you can do various intermediate strategies where you mix and match those calculations. Some may be acceptable by your tax authorities, some may not. Some countries have a very specific way you have to calculate these things. Other countries allow you to choose something as long as you stay consistent and always choose the same mechanism for calculation. In order to do all of that, you need software. I'm not going to endorse a specific piece of software, but I am going to mention them because I've used them in the past. The system I have used is called bitcoin.tax, and it's a website that allows you to put in information about your taxable transactions and get that information out. Now, you probably want to use that under the guidance of an accountant. And finding an accountant is not going to be that easy. But generally speaking, because accountants are jurisdiction specific, you want to do a search for accountant, my country or state name, and Bitcoin, and see what you find. And you may get some good results. It's not useful to just go Bitcoin accountant. And the reason is that a Bitcoin accountant in Australia is going to be no good for you if you're in Switzerland. You need someone in your local jurisdiction who is licensed to practice accounting in your local jurisdiction and knows the nuances. So I hope that has been helpful. If you want to just get an idea for yourself or keep track of your transactions, make sure you keep meticulous records. Every time you buy, sell, or use cryptocurrency in any form, make sure you keep a record. Export transaction lists regularly from wallets, so if you lose the wallet, you still have them. Use labeling. When you make a transaction in a wallet that supports it, put a text label that reminds you, oh, that was when I bought coffee. This was when I bought 2 pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. And that will help you calculate your capital gains and capital losses. By the way, I wonder if Lasso ever tried to do a capital loss claim for his Bitcoin pizzas. He'd be able to offset all capital gains for the rest of his damn life based on that one taxable event. All right. Let's see what else. Let me do the last question for today. Do you recommend using or memorizing a BIP39 mnemonic phrase as the best method to store my keys? Well, first of all, I do recommend using a mnemonic phrase to back up your keys. And in fact, I recommend using that in combination with a hardware wallet and in the form of a hierarchical deterministic wallet system. But basically, if you're using a mnemonic phrase with a hardware wallet, that will be a very secure way of controlling your own crypto. For the vast majority of users, with an intermediate level of expertise, who are not security experts, who are not sysadmins, who are not security administrators, other methods are much riskier because you will not know the gap in knowledge that will expose you to security problems that you have. So if you're not a security expert, stick with broadly standardized, broadly applicable things. And that means use a hardware wallet. And then don't try to improvise. Use the technology as recommended in the simplest form that you feel confident you can execute on. So a BIP39 mnemonic phrase backed up. And don't get fancy. Don't photograph it. Don't put it online. Don't put it on Google Drive or Dropbox. Don't decrypt it on a USB stick. Write it down, pen and paper. If you're worried about fire, flood, and other natural disasters, which you kind of should be, get one of those steel recording devices, either etching or with little pre-stamped steel letters and numbers, so that you can record it in a form that is durable against natural disasters. Store it in 2 or more places. Should you memorize it? Tricky. I think if the circumstances demand it. Listen, if you're a Syrian refugee and you're about to swim the fucking Mediterranean and you're going to be intercepted by every type of criminal on the planet, smugglers, boat captains, the Greek and Italian Coast Guard and other such criminals, and they are going to rob you at every state of your journey from everything you have on you, then memorizing a mnemonic phrase is probably your best bet. In that case, and if you plan to memorize it, do not use a 24-word mnemonic. Use a 12-word mnemonic. Generate a 12-word mnemonic. Memorize it, and do a backup restore, backup restore, backup restore several times until you are certain you're not going to forget it. Lull yourself to sleep every night by singing the 12 words in your head. Create a mental picture that somehow associates these words with some images, a story, a narrative that makes it easier to remember, and keep repeating that. And then get ready to travel on your hazardous voyage. Yes, for that purpose, memorize a BIP39 mnemonic. But don't do that if you've got a nice warm house and you've got somewhere where you can store a seed that you can write down and keep it safe. No, use a steel backup instead. All right. That's it, everyone. We've reached the end of our September live stream Q&A. Once again, thank you all for your time. Next week, we have a break. It's going to be the first Saturday in months that I am not broadcasting a live stream. On October 10th, we're doing a live premiere of my Firesat chat with Lamar Wilson for the Black Blockchain Summit that happened a few weeks ago. It's a great chat, a great conversation with an old friend from the crypto space back from 2013, 2014. I enjoyed doing it very much. I hope you enjoy it. That's on October 10th. It's a live premiere. I'm going to be in the chat, and I will join you for Q&A and general discussion. I hope Lamar will join us too. On October 17th, I'm doing a bonus live stream with my good friend and co-author of my upcoming book, our upcoming book, René Picard, for live stream bonus Q&A on mastering the Lightning Network. Our upcoming book, Mastering the Lightning Network, written with myself, René Picard, and Olaolu Oshitokun, the CTO of Lightning Labs, is still in progress. We've delivered the first half of the book, and you can see that's on GitHub, and it's an open source book, as all of my previous mastering series. It's moving slowly. A little pandemic happened in the meantime, but we are making great progress, and it's a great pleasure of mine to have René this time come on the show with me. And we're going to try and put together a little conversation, both a conversation about Lightning, a conversation about the book and how we're going about it and what we hope to achieve, and then take your questions. It's probably going to be a 2-hour live stream because there's going to be an initial discussion. And that's what we have planned for the month of October. There's some more things coming, some great surprises, 2 more great events. I can't wait to tell you about some of them. All right. Subscribe so that you get notifications of all of the upcoming videos. Hit the subscribe button now. Hit the little bell icon next to it to receive notifications of all new videos. If you liked this video, hit the thumbs up like button to let everyone know. If you didn't like this video, I believe if you press like twice, it will record your dislike. And then share. Share it with everyone you want to share these questions and answers. And again, thank you so much. Thank you, patrons, for supporting me. Thank you, YouTube members, for supporting me with your awesome Emoji Storm game. And thank you, everyone else, for giving me part of your Saturday morning. I'm Andreas M. Antonopoulos, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye, everyone.